Hi, everybody. This is my son, Jaden, and before we get started, Jaden is going to say a quick hello to you all, and when he does, you have to applaud for him. So say hi. Now, Jaden's going to help me out a bit today. He's going to be my page turner here, and we've practiced this talk several times together so that he can follow along. Like most people with autism, Jaden is a very concrete thinker. He can write, but he largely thinks and communicates in nouns. He loves basic order and structure, and he also loves to hear stories about his life. He doesn't talk, but based on his response to these stories, we all have a pretty good idea what he understands. If I tell you right now about his love for dogs, or ice cream, or Skittles, he's very happy, obviously. And I'm pretty sure his senses are kicking into gear as he smells or pictures or feels those things in his mind. When things are a little bit more abstract, like emotions, pain, or danger, Jaden struggles to understand. His expression of feeling is incredibly honest. He'll smile or giggle when he's happy, but when he's sad, he'll cry, and when he's anxious, he'll get very tense or shaky. When he's sick, it's very hard to tell unless you read his skin tone, watch his eyes, really read his mannerisms to try to understand what it is that's going on inside him. Good work. The concept of danger is particularly elusive for Jaden. His obsession with dogs means that if he sees a strange pit bull or a German shepherd, he'll get super excited, and he'll run up to them, usually squealing very loudly. His senses are keenly attracted to the smell of the dog's breath and the feeling of its tongue, so he'll immediately go nose to nose with them. And he loves the feel of the squishiest parts of the dog, so he'll squeeze them very, very hard, obviously quite dangerous. Traffic is also a challenge for Jaden. You can teach him to look both ways, but it's just a routine for him. He has real trouble trying to figure out when it's safe or when it's not safe to cross. Those are things that are just too abstract for him to understand. Now, today's theme is autism and innovation, and the innovation I'm going to talk about today is a bit different. It's innovation in the way that we think about the people around us, all around us, at a global level. And I'm going to use a seemingly unrelated yet very familiar event from the past to help us frame that thinking. On September 12th, 1962, President John F. Kennedy delivered a speech to a crowd of 35,000 people at Rice Football Stadium. In that speech, he said these words: "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win." Of course, we know that in 1969, man did reach the moon, something seemingly impossible less than a decade earlier, and quite honestly, hard to imagine even today. But in challenging his country to reach the unreachable, Kennedy's vision led to innumerable other inventions that we take for granted in our lives today. Things like CT scans, shoe insoles, cordless tools, artificial limbs, smoke detectors, and ear thermometers are things that have come out over the years through the exploration of space and led to the development of those things. Kennedy's vision of landing a man on the moon provides us a wonderful metaphor for what's going on in the world of international development today. In 2015, the world came together around what's called the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. These 17 goals seek to mobilize efforts to end all forms of poverty and inequality, ensuring no one is left behind. Like the lunar mission, the SDGs have a timeline to meet the goals by 2030, and these goals will also serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. The world's language around the SDGs is very consistent with Kennedy's challenge we are willing to accept, unwilling to postpone, and intend to win. But what I want to zero in on today is the reason Kennedy chose his goals. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard. In 1962, the moon seemed nearly unreachable. Today, in the international development world, there's a common consensus that we also need to focus on the hardest to reach, or the most vulnerable. There's much discussion about whom those most vulnerable are. For example, some might think of a young boy in a refugee camp in Syria, overcrowded and lacking security and the basic necessities of life. Others might envision a young teenage girl in rural Africa, where early forced marriage is common, and many girls are not allowed even a primary education. Both are obviously extremely difficult circumstances. But let's think about these situations for a moment. What if, on top of these difficult circumstances, or virtually any other you can imagine, you were to add autism to the mix? What would that mean to the 9-year-old boy in a refugee camp? I think about Jaden when he was 9. One time we were at an Edmonton Oilers hockey game. You remember this? Yeah, the type of fun event that many of us take for granted in North America. And we were sitting in the seats, and suddenly Jaden giggles and squeals, and I know something's on his mind. And without warning, he reaches over the shoulder of the 5-year-old girl in front of him, and he grabs the ice cream right off the top of her cone. And he holds it like you'd hold a snowball, and he starts to eat it while the ice cream dribbles through his fingers. And of course, I quickly say to the dad, I whisper that he has autism, and of course the dad understands right away. The 5-year-old girl did not understand at all. But we got her some more ice cream in the intermission, and everything was okay. Another time we were at McDonald's, West Edmonton Mall, the busiest McDonald's probably in the world between Christmas and New Year's. And I had my hands full, so I couldn't hold Jaden's hand like I normally do. You remember this? And suddenly he gets that same squeal, that same excited squeal. And he runs back to the counter, and I know I'm in trouble at this point. And when he gets to the counter, he reaches into the bin where they hold the crushed Smarties for the McFlurries, and he grabs a handful of crushed Smarties and he shoves them in his face. And he has the biggest smile you've ever seen. Now, these stories are kind of funny, and because we live in a part of the world where there's a decent understanding of autism, with a quick explanation, everybody chuckles and we just move on with our lives. But imagine, turn it, there you go. But imagine instead a boy like Jaden living in a crowded refugee camp with tensions high and everyone struggling just to survive. Imagine that instead of understanding autism as a complex neurological disorder, it's viewed with the stigma of some sort of curse or the result of bad parenting. This boy, who looks like any other boy, runs up suddenly, shrieking startlingly, and grabs food out of a 5-year-old's hand and immediately consumes it, possibly the first food that child's had in days. How would that end for that boy with autism? Now let's consider the 13-year-old girl in rural Africa. There are many reasons why girls in parts of rural Africa and much of the developing world are vulnerable to start with. All too often, at just 13, girls have been denied even a basic education, forced to marry men many years older, or been sexually exploited in other ways. But now imagine a 13-year-old girl living with autism on top of all of that. People with autism may or may not like strangers to the extreme, but one thing very common is a difficulty in reading situations, comprehending something as abstract as human interaction or intention. People with autism can be very trusting, whether they know you or not. How much more would this girl suffer from her lack of education? How much more vulnerable would she be to those who would take advantage of her, or more exposed to danger in a world devoid of the safety standards we're accustomed to in our lives? Now, one of the things I always try to avoid is an endless debate about who in the world is the most vulnerable or likely to be left behind. Vulnerability has many forms, and there are many people around us, even in this room, who are vulnerable to things that may be invisible to the rest of us. Too often, these types of debates impede our most important missions. Over half a century ago, JFK could have gotten caught up in a debate about whether to invest in the lunar mission or instead invest in other smaller innovations that could change our lives, like CT scans, artificial limbs, or thousands of other things. Instead, by focusing on the thing hardest to reach, his vision helped the world to discover so much more than we believed we were capable of. We're faced with a similar decision now at a global level. If we can wire our hearts to reach every girl with autism or another developmental disability in rural Africa, it will change the way we think about the rights and education of every girl in Africa or every girl in the world. If we can find a way to reach that little boy with autism or another developmental disability in a refugee camp in Syria, It will change the way we see all boys. It will change the way we see all refugees. To close, I want to share a story about a trip that I took last year to Tanzania. We were visiting a village where a group of teenage boys were mesmerized by my iPad. I showed them a picture of my daughter, Jenae, then 15 years old. "She's nice," one of them said in Swahili. I agreed. She is really nice. Then I showed them this picture of Jaden and explained that he has autism and what he's like. The boys listened intently, and then the boy on the right with the black and yellow shirt looked me in the eye and said, again in Swahili, "I like him. He's beautiful. I'll pray for him." With just a little bit of understanding, that 15-year-old boy's heart became attached to in a very special way to another young person with autism, half a world away from him. We are right now in the early stages of a global partnership to reach every person in the world living with autism in a way that will meaningfully improve their lives. This will not be easy. In fact, it will be incredibly hard. If we choose to do it, this goal will serve to organize and measure the very best of our energies and skills. If we accept it and embrace it, it will change the world not only for people with autism, but for every single one of us. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us today, and as always, I'm going to give Jaden the last words. Say bye-bye.